All right, guys, welcome back. I got a special guest with us here today, Nolan King. You guys might recognize him from Twitter at Nolan King, or your tag is actually MMA_Kings, correct?
That is correct, man. I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to be here. First time, speaking with you other than the other day when we get to cover CES down in Rhode Island.
You know, it's so cool. Every event that I go to, I always meet at least one person that I've seen on Twitter. And honestly, man, I don't know how much of my audience is actually on Twitter, but if they are, they've definitely seen your profile because you've been booming in 2018 with breaking a lot of fighter news and stuff like that. So if you guys are listening, definitely go check out Nolan's page on Twitter. You're also on Instagram, correct?
I am, yep, at nking029. I don't use it as much for MMA stuff. It's more for just like personal pictures and stuff, but I'm always down to follow people and have people follow me. So that's cool too. And then the other thing is I work for MMAtoday.com, MMA-Today. A lot of my work's there, and then a lot on Flow Combat as well. I just started off a new stint with them, so I'm excited for that.
Congratulations about that too. That's huge. Flow Grappling is another big thing that they're doing over there, and our buddy James is a big contributor over there. So that's awesome for you, Nolan, and for everybody listening. We are going to be previewing the recap of CES 48 that went down this weekend, and me and Nolan were actually there. It was kind of weird. Before we jump into any recap, I'm sure everyone's anxious to hear. I just thought it was so funny because the night before I went to the event, I was reading your article on what the night was going to bring to us, and then I sat down at press row. I'm looking around, and I introduced myself to you. You're like, "Yeah, I'm Nolan." I was like, "Oh, I already know who you are." it was pretty comical.
Yeah, it was funny because when before you sat down, I took a little peek at who the name was next to me, and I knew Evil Eddie, I knew him from Twitter, I knew the podcast. I didn't know what your last name was, so I was like, okay, like that name sounds familiar. I don't know why. And then sure enough, when you said Evil Eddie, I was like, okay, I know you from Twitter, and I've listened to your podcast before, so pretty cool, man. Like you said, you always get to meet new people at these things, and put some faces to the names and get to talk in person for once.
Well, just to fill you in really quick on why my name's Evil Eddie is because my first name's Eddie with an E, and my last name's Vallejo. You saw my last name, it starts with V-I-L, so you take E and Vol, Evil Eddie. So there you go.
That's a natural nickname, man. You picked a good one.
All right, so let's jump into things here. CES 48, we were looking forward to this. Unfortunately, we were really nervous heading into this one because originally it was set up to be Matt Bessette, who you guys saw on the Dana White Contender Series kick off last year, and he unfortunately didn't win it, but somehow he was able to squeeze his way into the UFC, and he unfortunately was pulled from CES main event for CES 48, so we were all kind of scrambling, wondering what was going to happen, and then they announced this. What was your first thought when they announced this? Did you think that these two contenders were going to be enough to bring in a big draw for Access TV?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously Matt is the must-watch fighter for CES. He brings in large crowds. He gets people to watch on Access, and no matter what he brings it, he always puts on an exciting show, a real give-or-take fighter, willing to take some damage to throw down. And the guy they're bringing in, Jamal Emmers, is one of the best fighters, that they've imported, that I've ever seen them bring in. He's a really legit guy and was on the verge of getting signed himself. I wouldn't be surprised if he shows up in the UFC later this year. But Greg Rebello is another guy who has a good local following. He headlined their last event, CES 47, and he's a guy that they were looking at headlining their next event, CES 49. When I spoke with him, he said that they were looking for a late February event. They were looking at maybe doing something at Foxwoods or somewhere like that. And when the Bessette thing fell through, he said, hey, it just bumped my fight up a couple weeks. So Travis View's obviously a name. And the heavyweights, I think they always, bring a certain draw just to have that one punch knockout power. Somebody's going down.
That's like the old school mentality of a fight fan, right? You want to see that main event knockout, as in, Mike Tyson days. I like my father. If he goes to an event, he wants to see a knockout in the main event. So I think that's definitely a good idea that they switched that up to the heavyweight. But we're going to be starting backwards, guys. We're going to be starting off at the very first fight. And it actually went down Conor McGregor style, ended in 13 seconds. Now, I wasn't there, so Nolan, what did I miss in the Fabio Tarrant versus James Dysart?
Yeah, so Sharon is actually a training partner of Greg Rebello. Rebello cornered him, interestingly enough, for this fight, even though he was fighting later on in the card. And James Dysart's a guy that they've brought in a couple times. He's kind of had a rough go with CES. I know his last fight ended very similarly to this one, but it started out, and he appeared to be the aggressor. Dysart really went at him hard, kind of a little over wild, and shot for his single leg, kind of sloppy. And Sharon just locked in a Darce choke or a guillotine choke, excuse me. And that was all she wrote, man. There wasn't a whole lot to talk about with that one. It was pretty quick.
Just like that in 13 seconds, too. Unfortunately, James was 0-3 going into this one. You had Fabio on his pro debut. So, it's nice to see when they set this up, because the guy had his chance. Like, if you're the manager for this fight, you got a guy in 0-3, you're like, all right, well, this guy's making his pro debut, depending on his amateur career. But, big win for Fabio here. And moving forward, hopefully he'll get some tougher competition. I don't mean to starch James at all, but, very, very exciting first win there for a first-round submission.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And he's got all the tools. He's young, and he seems like he's certainly got the build of an MMA fighter. He's pretty scary as far as appearance goes. He's got big, thick legs. He's a thick fighter. So I think we'll definitely see him on the next CES card or the one after it. And he's a guy to watch, especially with some good training partners like Greg Rebello.
And you know what? We got into the second fight, and things just took off with a bam, man. Another really quick finish in just 39 seconds for Armis Guyton, who defeats Tommy Lee Davis. What a great name, Tommy Lee Davis. If you're not a rock star, I guess you're an MMA fighter with that name. But another really quick win here. And this is when I walked into the fight, and it was just like all systems go. Like, everyone was just on their laptop shooting out tweets. Like, things were banging for CES. The crowd was going wild. And I'll tell you this, after all the events I've been to in the past couple of years, it's really rare that you see things get kicked off with this much momentum at the beginning. If you're not at you guys can even see this on UFC cards. UFC cards usually start a little slow. For a local card to start off like this, I knew that we were in for a great night.
Yeah, for sure. It was one of those fights where both guys just kind of had the same mentality that they were just going to come out and just, chuck leather at one another. And, before the bout started off, it was one of those matchups. You always get a little bit, not nervous, but you kind of understand with, for example, CES, a New England-based promotion. They have their certain guys that they want to build. These guys are going to be back for them again. They live right down the street from the casino. Tommy Lee Davis was a guy that was local, I believe. I think Guyton, if I'm not mistaken, was from New York. So he's a guy they just kind of brought in for this fight. And if you looked at the two of them, Davis was a big dude. Pretty ripped. Got a couple inches on Guyton, and then Guyton just kind of looked, unassuming, just kind of like an average guy that was, in shape. And so for me, I kind of was like, oh, maybe they're kind of just, wanting to start off Tommy Lee Davis in memorable fashion, give him a little bit of a mismatch and try to build his experience, get his nerves out of the way, stuff like that. Nothing like malicious or anything, just kind of that's the way that things work sometimes. And no, that was just, looks are deceiving because Guyton just came in there in hostile territory and he just, hit Tommy Lee Davis with an absolutely vicious combo. Davis was down for quite a while after that, and it was a good, like you said, it was a good fight to get things going as the second fight of the night. I can't complain with that one. 39 seconds of pure enjoyment for me.
Yeah, like you said, both guys from the East Coast, but we did see a lot of these fight cards bringing people over from all sorts of kind of local places. That's why you see the ticket sales on these local events skyrocket, and that's why you get the asses in the seats. But the issue with that a lot of times is it's hard to find talented fighters, and it didn't seem like that was an issue at CES 48. So another big win for Armis in his pro debut. And moving forward, we had Brendan Moreau versus John Costa, and this was another interesting fight to start things off with a quick finish.
Yeah, man, just continuing their streak. CES 47 was all finishes, and then CES 48 just started that same way. You know, I This was the third straight finish on the card, and it was a good fight. It was back and forth. Costa was winning the bout, and then, he slipped up a little bit. He had all the momentum on his side, and he threw kind of an errant knee that hit Moreau right in the groin, and referees stopped it. And from that point on, it just was all Moreau or Maradi. I'm not sure which way if that's
I think
correct.
it is Maradi. I think it is
Maradi.
Maradi.
Okay. So Maradi, he just swung the momentum from that point on. He got a number of takedowns, and then he was able to finish it off and win by TKO. So impressive performance from him in his debut. I always like to see young guys be able to overcome adversity. I think that's a skill that not everybody necessarily gets to have. And sometimes we see that when they reach the big show is they face a guy that's tough and they have to overcome things and they don't do well. So for Maradi to get that out of the way, I think is big. And Costa, was competitive. It wasn't a blow up by any means. And, hopefully he can learn from his mistakes and be a little more careful with his strikes.
Well, you have John from Boston, and then you have Brandon from New Hampshire. And like I said, it's your pro debut. You have all these things running through your head. Of course, every fighter is different. But when you actually make that walkout and you smell the Vaseline, the popcorn, or in this case, the KFC and Taco Bell at CES 48, it hits you. It's a reality that sinks in your stomach, and you might have a game plan that easily could be thrown out the window because you're just so anxious. And it seemed like this happened for a lot of guys with the pro debut, whether it worked against them or for them. It was all action at CES 48. So, out of those three fights, man, who are you most excited to see moving forward? I mean, all these guys are making their pro debuts, and they all had some really nice finishes. So, picking those three out of a box, who are you excited there?
I want to see more of Sharon just because I feel like, it was 13 seconds. It was so quick. I've heard about this guy from his amateur career. Rebello even name dropped him on our interview when we were talking. So he's definitely somebody to keep an eye on. And, 13 seconds, I don't care necessarily who you're fighting. The guy, Dissert had way more experience than Sharon did. So I cannot wait to see him back. And I'm sure, he'll be, like I said, on one of the next upcoming CES cards.
So this next fight was an all-female fight. Finally, I was able to get situated at CES, get the laptop up and running, get the updates out for you guys, and finally able to enjoy the fights because as a press, even if you're watching at home, you probably go through the same struggle, Nolan. When you're watching at home, it's hard to get every little detail down. You're trying to catch up sometimes, so there are some things that you miss, so I appreciate you helping us with those first three fights there. But this one was interesting and not much action, but there were some really nasty knees that were landed in this fight from the clinch position. Both girls, really, I didn't know what to expect going into this fight, but they were both down to fight. They couldn't break out of the clinch situation. We see this a lot in female fights, specifically with even in the UFC with people like Felice Herrig, where they just stay in the same zone. They take the same 3 steps, do the same 3 moves, and nothing really switches up. And it is a little frustrating, but these girls are growing. This is still a local card. They're not in the UFC yet. What was your thoughts here on this fight? Because it was a little slow, but for the most part, there was some damage that was done on both ends.
Yeah, it was really interesting because that first round started off and Lindsey Williams was in control. If you look at that round as a whole, she was in control for almost the whole thing. But Rose was really the only one landing, damaging shots. And sometimes we'll see that when they hit the ground. The fighter from the bottom will be working more, throwing, all types of punches and elbows from the bottom. But in this case, it was against the cage, which was something that was very interesting to me. It's kind of more of an unusual, situation there where I would have been interested to see how the judges scored that first round. You and I both agreed, I think, when we were there that we thought Rose won it. But it was one of those ones where I could see the judges giving it to Williams just because she looked like she was in control the whole time.
Yeah.
So that would have been very interesting to me. As the fight as a whole, I actually thought Lindsey Williams looked very impressive. It wasn't necessarily the prettiest win, but for, WMMA is still evolving. And a lot of times with the regional shows, it's tough to find prospects, to any extent. I think it's just the way that it is. WMMA has not been around that long. It's not been mainstream. So, you're just starting to see fighters that have been doing this for a few years. And Lindsey Williams looked good. I'd be excited. I hope that CES brings her back. I know she's from Minnesota or wherever. So, there's a good chance that she'll be maybe fighting for LFA or somewhere like that next. But definitely a name to keep, an eye on. And I'm excited to see her grow.
Speaking of LFA and, CES that we were covering, a lot of these guys we see go to the UFC. So if you guys out there haven't seen a CES card or an LFA card, I think last year 30 plus fighters went to the UFC from just LFA.
Yeah,
So,
it's wild, man. And we're starting to see that a little bit with CES too. I just being from this area, we never really had a big promotion, and now all of a sudden CES is pumping out guys like Rob Font, Calvin Cater, and all these other guys that are showing up in the rankings. So I think regional MMA as a whole is looking really good, and the Access TV promotions are killing it as of late. They're awesome.
Yeah, Access is a big deal, especially with, you got Pat Miletich, was a familiar name for us, and somebody that's actually really good. But you know what it seems like, Nolan, before we break this fight down even further, as you're talking about LFA, and we were just saying 30 people getting brought up, it seems like a lot of the people that do get brought up are actually on short notice fights now. It seems like there's people out there that have all the talent in the world, like Jose Shorty Torres, double champ, winning fights back-to-back, but can't get that call. And a lot of these people like Jesse Jess, they're getting that late notice call up, or the Dana White Contender Series. So that's all stuff to get really excited for. So definitely tune in to Access TV, guys, because it's definitely a feeder league LFA. All right, so Hillary Rose, man, pro debut, like we're saying, back and forth, and I'm looking at my results right here. Me and you definitely were going back and forth in the first round. I gave it to Rose 10-9, but in the second round, like you said, it was right back in the same place. It was right back in the grappling against the cage. And ultimately, we saw the official decision go to Lindsey Williams with just 59 seconds left in the entire fight. Like, I really thought it was going to go to decision. Nope, she was able to get it done, which is such a plus in a fight like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks great for her. She was up. She had won the second round pretty decisively. She won the third round pretty decisively, up until the like you said, 59 seconds left in the fight.
Yeah.
And she didn't necessarily have to go for that finish, and she did. She showed that she wanted to show a little bit extra. She wasn't there just to pick up a win. She was there to be impressive too, which I think there's something to be said about that. And I think other promotions will take notice, especially, like I said, with WMMA needing more prospects. And, hopefully somebody picks her up and we see her back, on Access TV sometime soon.
And another fight that really stuck out. This was kind of another weird one. Dylan Lockard, 3-0. He was going up against Shane Manley. And now in the first round, Manley came out really strong and tagged him with a really nice hook that really knocked up his eye. I mean, he was getting him back into the cage. Was using the hooks, but he wasn't really able to gain any control. And I gave the first round to Lockard. I didn't know who you scored that round for, but definitely give the first round to Lockard. But after that, the momentum just really switched, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree, man. I had that first round for Lockard too. And like I said, sometimes they bring in these guys from out of town. You don't know what to expect. And I thought Manley, looked really good. I thought he looked, he wasn't necessarily the more skilled fighter in every aspect, but it seemed like he was the smarter fighter. He was able to pace himself well, kind of go to what worked for him.
And push the pressure.
Yeah. He wasn't shying away. And especially after, losing the first round, he was going right at him, from the second on. And, the cardio was there, the pressure was there. And, Manley, again, good props on him coming into enemy territory and, getting the W. I believe he was the only fighter on the main card from not inside New England to get that win. So props to him.
Let's check that out. I think you're right.
Rebello, yeah.
New York, New Hampshire. Wow. So that fight goes to a decision. Official decision went 29-28, 29-28, and 30-27. I think the 30-27, we saw a lot of a different scorecard on Brian Miner's scorecards. I mean, he was really different from a lot of the other judges, and I'm always a huge fan of his calling, and I'm really happy that he's doing judging, and I had to agree with him a lot on this night. There was a lot of decisions that I was like right on point with Brian Miner. So a big shout out to Brian for doing a good job. It's nice to see him stepping outside of a ref as also being a judge. I like to see that.
Yeah, he's been, him and Kevin McDonald have been doing the regional scene in New England reffing forever. And like you said, now I'm starting to notice him, sitting cage side in California for Bellator. So he's really branching out, and good for him. He can do both, and he's qualified, and he's good at both of those things. So more power to him, and I'm guessing we'll see more of him in 2018.
Yeah, he after the fight, he usually comes up to me after the fights, and I saw him at the end of press row, and he was telling me that they're sending him out to Budapest. I mean, it's so crazy how far these guys travel all year long. Like,
Very cool. Yeah.
people don't give them enough credit. I mean, these guys leave their families for weeks on end. I think everybody, not only the fighters, don't get the respect that they deserve in this community sometimes. So big shout out to Brian Miner here for this.
Yeah,
one.
absolutely. And I was going to say on top of that, we're so quick to criticize these guys when they don't do well, but some of them, like Brian and Kevin are consistently good referees and judges. Sure, they might have their off days, but overall they do a good job, and they keep the fighters safe for the most part. I know that's been a big topic as of late, and I'd like to see some of these guys that have really worked at it and really were up, came through the ranks as a referee, see them start to make it to the big show and get more experience, and if some of the guys that have been around forever are starting to seem like they're slacking a little bit, or they just don't have it, I have no problem with throwing in guys like Brian and Kevin, completely qualified guys that may not have that name yet.
Well, you got to remember with Big John gone, who was a huge asset to MMA for so many years, endless years, it's leaving an open spot now for a lot of guys. And Brian told me they're all digging their claws to get to that spot. I mean, he covered a lot of cards. He was on some of the biggest pay-per-views, so now that spot's open. So we'll see what happens with it. But I would like to see more refs turn over to the judging. All right, so here we go. This is a fight that stood out to me. After the fight, I was thinking about his post-fight speech. Brian B.J. Marino, who was returning to the cage after 7 years away. I think he did 2 tours in Afghanistan, they were saying. Do you know anything about Brian B.J. Marino before you got to this fight? Because I didn't, and I was left touched personally.
Yeah,
well,
it was
I
really
wasn't
cool.
personally touched by him, but you know what I'm saying here.
Yeah, no, I got you. And, I felt the same way. I didn't know too much about him before this. I've only been following the regional scene for about 5 years, and they said he's been off for, 7. So a little bit before my time, which in my memory, that seems like a long time.
Yeah.
So, it's pretty incredible to, regardless of who you're coming back and fighting at whatever level or whatever you're doing, any sport, to be away for 7 years and come back and put on the performance that he did. I thought that was a phenomenal fight. Mikkel made it fun too. Props to him. And it was just a pretty cool moment. Like you said, his post-fight speech was pretty awesome. And I'm interested to see where he goes from here,
So there was a lot of aspects about this fight where I was surprised because, like you're saying, man, 7 years away in MMA, that's like 14. You can easily double that with the things that people are learning now about our sport and just new ways of training, new ways of, people don't even spar as much as they used to in gyms now because they're realizing the damage that they're taking. I mean, there's just so many different things. 7 years away really is 14 years, and he came out like GSP, like Superman, like old school style punches and techniques that were working all night for him. But he was clipped a couple of times by Mikkel, but somehow it wasn't even phasing him, like at all. He just had his eyes dead set. Like it almost felt like he was so comfortable and calm, and I was surprised for somebody that was out of the cage that long. And my listeners all know I don't believe in ring rust, and let me ask you, what are your thoughts on ring rust? Because it really is case by case. But do you believe in ring rust? Is it a real thing?
I think yes and no. I mean, sure. I think guys can get a little bit, they can fall away from being used to being in there. You do this. For example, Brian. He competed for a certain amount of time, and he might not be as familiar being inside the octagon or the cage as he was when he was fighting 4 times a year or 3 times a year. So in that regard, yes, I don't think it's like, I think people make it out to be maybe a little bit overboard, in terms of like, that's why this person lost, or that's why, it had a huge impact where they couldn't even shake it at the beginning. But I think, more so if you're prepared and you're training and you're doing everything you can, I think that most times guys, even with these layoffs, just in my experience, just talking to them, most of them seem to oftentimes surprise themselves with how comfortable they do feel, despite all these nerves and everything else. So like you said, it's a case-by-case basis, but, in cases like Brian Marino, again, I hadn't seen him fight prior to this, so I can't really say. To me, he didn't look very rusty at all.
I mean, if that was him in a rusty condition, then he was a straight killer that should have been in the UFC 7 years ago. We can say that. But my point being, like, if you look at people like the Korean Zombie, who returned after 2 years away, had to do his service, came out and then knocked out Dennis Bermudez the way he did. Dominic Cruz coming back and beating TJ Dillashaw. I mean, it was a close fight. I did score it for TJ, but still, no ring rust there, in my opinion. So it really is case by case. And in this one, it really seemed like Brian BJ Marino had a lot of fun in there and was happy to be back in there. And that's something that I can embrace and get behind. And my last note on the Marino fight is his post-fight speech about addiction and reaching out for help. And that's a message that is endless. That's a timeless message that everybody should really consider. And if you know somebody that is going through addiction, you know how hard of a toll it can take on everybody around them. So it's nice seeing Brian reach out and personally touched me with that. So what were your thoughts on Brian's post-fight speech, and where do you see him headed from here?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was, phenomenal. He's really quite the guy. He seems to have touched on a lot of bases to be inspirational to people. Like you said, the addiction that the whole addiction aspect that he touched on, the fact that he was in the military. I'm sure those things, can be kind of interconnected for a lot of people, and mental health and things like that. So very cool message. Just a couple days after the Bell Let's Talk movement on Twitter. So very timely in that regard. Very, very good post-fight speech. I encourage people. I don't know if Access has put it up anywhere. I think I saw it on their Twitter account. So check it out if you get a chance. And then as far as where he goes from here, he's got that one under his belt. He's 6-1 now. He's not getting necessarily any younger. So I'd like to, hopefully, if he's not too banged up, for them to throw him on the next event, whether it be, in March or early April or whenever the CES decides to go back to Twin River.
I mean, he's only a couple years older than me. He looked like he was a little older, though. Like, he looked like he was almost 40. The guy is like 32 or something.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing about the sport. Like, age is just a number to a certain extent. And then, you're also just the toll that things take on your body is really the big thing. We've seen guys like Mark Hunt go, can succeed into their 40s. And then there's other guys that, they hit, 31 years old and they're done. Their just body can't do it
Jose
anymore.
Aldo.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, you look at we thought he'd be around forever. So time is a weird thing, and it's certainly, presents itself that way in MMA. So, I'd like to see him get in there again, get in there ASAP. You don't know how long you're going to have. And hopefully they give him a little bit, a tougher guy next time and tougher guy after that. And, just keep climbing the ranks because he's a guy that people can get behind.
Yeah, that's somebody I really want to see on the next CES card. So moving forward, we had Timothy the Good Soldier Woods going up against Tim the Bear Karen. Now, I'm going to give this one to you because I believe this was the weird one where he got thrown and knocked out unconscious, in a very weird way.
This was a weird one. This made the highlight reels, I feel like, for all the wrong reasons. Karen, I was super excited to see. He's a guy everybody here in New England's been talking about for quite some time. New Hampshire's not necessarily known for their MMA product, but he's a guy that is from New Hampshire, finally gets signed to CES. Everybody's excited to see what the hype is about. Finally gets a little bit of a step up in competition from what he was facing in the local scene up in New Hampshire. And the fight ends in 1 minute and 23 seconds. Timothy Woods tried to go for a judo throw. Somehow, I've never seen something like this before, ever. I've watched a lot of fights, I feel like. Somehow Karen ends up slipping under him, and Woods just plants his own head into the canvas, man. And I know you were there, and you can attest to how loud and awful that sounded. And he might have been down longer than anybody I've seen. I feel like I've attended my fair share of events too, and that might have been the longest I've seen somebody down. That was pretty, kind of scary there for a little bit. But good thing he gave us a little wave when he was leaving. He put his, kind of shrugged his arms or whatever to say, maybe he didn't think he should be on the board or something. But I'm glad they did that precautionary, and hopefully, he's all right. And, hopefully we can get Karen an opponent next time that's, somebody that he can test himself against.
I mean, again, me and you were going back and forth. We're like, was that a judo throw? Like, what exactly just happened? Like, what did we just witness? And I believe I think it was this fight where I was like, we've seen this happen plenty of times before. Like with, what's his name? He had his arms up against the cage.
Yeah,
just got
Newton. Carlos Newton.
Carlos Newton.
Yeah, not Emmanuel Newton.
Yeah, getting knocked out in a brutal fashion like that. We saw it in Rob Emerson versus
Yep.
Gray Maynard, where they're actually both knocked out, but no one caught on except Joe Rogan onto that. Well, Gray did. But it was just such a weird thing. And like you said, he was out for so long. You get nervous in situations like that because, I mean, I tweeted out he had to get brought out on a backboard, even though, it seemed like forever. It was only like 3 minutes, but for 3 minutes being out like that is not normal. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
No,
There was no movement. There was nothing.
no, that's the thing. You obviously, from our vantage point, we're on the ground, so we're just looking for some type of, hands or arm movement, and I think, arms or legs, to move. And I think at one point we saw his arms move. I think you pointed out to me, and then, still by the time they rolled him back on, they rolled him to one side and slipped the backboard under and rolled him. We still hadn't seen his legs move necessarily, but that wave by him was a little encouraging. So hopefully he's doing well. I haven't seen anything bad, so that's usually a good sign. And hopefully he can get back in there and it's not too serious.
Have you seen any updates on his current condition? Because that's something I always push for promotions. You see guys like Bellator sometimes don't do it. The fans have to ask. I think that's something that every promotion needs to get behind to make sure that the audience knows that their fighter is okay. Have you seen anything on this?
I haven't seen anything. To be fair, I haven't necessarily looked into it too much. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm a lot of the regional guys are really good about promoting themselves on Facebook and stuff. So, I'll probably, when I stop talking to you here, I'll probably go check that out and see what's up with him.
They really are good on Facebook. I mean, it's almost like they met up and had like a big meeting because I don't know if you guys see, like, I don't go on Facebook that much, but when I do, I follow all these guys and they're always conversating back and forth with one another, all different weight classes. So it's kind of cool to see. So, you should definitely pick up on some of these fighters, and that's something I definitely need to check. I'd guess that CES would let everybody know. I'm sure they did, but I'm just saying that's something that people need to make sure that they're aware of. When you have somebody under contract that gets hurt like that, you have a lot of people at home that are worried. So that's something they need to do, especially if it's on Access TV and you get knocked out like that. So hopefully he is doing good.
Yeah, I agree, man. That's prayers up to him, and the sport just keeps on rolling, and hopefully I'm sure he loves the sport as much as we do, and hopefully he can get back in there sometime in the future. But that was definitely one of the scarier things I've seen live at an event.
So moving forward, we got to our co-main event, and this one definitely delivered. I mean, all the lights shut down, and I was like, what's going on? And all of a sudden you hear this little Italian music playing. I look up at the big screen, and they're like in this pizza restaurant having dinner, eating cannolis. I was like, what are we seeing? And it's Denise Sweetbread Pavia? How do you pronounce his Paiva? And they did a perfect little preview, like almost like an embedded kind of, where they get the audience to get to know the fighter. And being here on the East Coast, we're all familiar with pizza, and especially here in New Haven, where I'm from. Worcester Street's one of the world-renowned places to get pizza around here. But, they were showing that he works with his family's pizza place and that he's a fighter and has all this support. So you really get behind him. And that's something I really like seeing for smaller promotions, because they're getting behind their fighters a lot and promoting them for people to get noticed. And I related a lot. And, going into this one, he had a tough competition with Bam Bam's little brother. Did we get to the bottom of that?
I think that's what the assumption we came across was. I don't think we ever necessarily confirmed it, but I feel pretty good about that guess.
Kevin Barberina, which we believe is the little brother for Bam Bam. I think Bam Bam has two twin little brothers, two siblings, because Bam Bam's definitely born before 1990, and that's when Kevin Barberina is born. But going into this fight, man, Kevin Barberina had 5-3 record, 3 submission wins, and Sweetbread 10-6. So this was a pretty evenly matched fight. I didn't really know what to expect. I really didn't want either of them to lose, just because I just felt so devoted to both of these guys. Like, I wanted Bam Bam's little brother to win. I wanted the Italian guy to win. Not to mention, you got his family sitting in front of us and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, going into this fight, where were your thoughts at before that first round?
Yeah, so, I kind of looked over both their records, and Dennis is a guy I'm a little more familiar with. So when I saw, 10-6, like I said, I think I mentioned this to you, when we were there. It's a little deceiving. He started off his career at 3-5, and since then, if you do the math, before the fight on Friday, he won 7 out of 8 fights. So he's fought every single one of his fights for CES, which is pretty impressive, both in the fact that he's pretty loyal and the fact that he's fought at a high level on the regional scene, since he started this. And he hasn't had easy matchups. He's fought a lot of guys that are more experienced than him on the come up. So I was familiar with him. And then, honestly, Kevin Barberena was just, if you look at his record, he was just like a miniature version of Dennis Paiva. The guy was 4-4, I believe, but he had won 3 in a row and 4 out of 5. So it was good matchmaking in that regard. And, I was excited just to see what Bam Bam's brother brings to the table. We know how Bam Bam oftentimes was counted out, and, you can't do that. So with the Barberenas, and man, that was
like
a good
against
fight.
Sage Northcutt.
Exactly. So that was the fight on paper I had circled as potentially the fight of the night, and I thought it delivered.
It definitely did, even though it was the decision. And my thoughts on it, once we got into the first round, seemed like both guys were really trying to feel one another out for the most part. Really slow, but then the momentum started building for Sweetbread, and we started seeing like a little cocky side of him, hands down fighting. But he paid for it a couple of times, but ultimately was able to put a little more of an edge on it and get a little more powerful shots. I believe he even had some really nice timed takedowns mixed up in there. I have to go back and look at my my results on my MMAnews.com. But I just remember looking at him with his hands down. I was like, dude, don't commit too much to thinking that you won, because we've seen in fights plenty of times. Look back at Clay Guida versus T-City, last minute of the fight, and Clay gets finished. You can't risk fights like that. Even Eric Silva, making people come in thinking that his hands are down or that he's hurt, playing little games like that. You can get caught. And when you're on a CES card like this and it's the third round, play it safe, even though you want to put on a show. I mean, going in the third round, you remember he was trying to do the Cody Nolov thing, like hyping it up. It's not going to leave this round. You know what I mean?
Did the Max Holloway, the point to the ground at the end.
And don't get me wrong, that is awesome. Yeah. But I just get a little nervous that they're getting a little bit too cocky sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, it's one thing to maybe talk a little bit or give a little bit of flash, but I think sometimes you don't want to throw your whole game plan out the window, and you kind of want to stay grounded that this guy is a professional fighter who is a pretty even matchup to you, and just because you're winning, you don't want to become the highlight reel for the wrong reasons. You want to become the highlight reel for the right ones. So I thought in retrospect, it looks really impressive now that he was doing that.
Yeah.
Got away with it. But I agree with where you're coming from. I always get nervous when I see guys do that they'll, get a little too overconfident. And, in the sport, it only takes one. So gotta watch out when you're in there at all times.
And shout out to Sweetbread. He was going to try to join us tonight, actually, Nolan.
Oh, yeah.
I talked to him, and I didn't hear back from him. So I'm guessing that maybe he's at the restaurant or something. But hopefully I'll be able to get him on. Maybe he'll be even on this episode of Pure Evil MMA. We'll have to see after I wrap up this interview. But moving forward, I am excited. I don't want to give away my fight of the night or anything. And I'm not saying this is, because it did go to decision. But this is a fight that stood out mainly because you had somebody who's a little brother of a UFC fighter. And then you had the Italian background of Sweetbread, which I really connected with. And seeing him go in there and play the game that he played, I mean, there was a little Conor McGregor-esque, but it seemed like it was natural. It seemed like it really was his personality. It didn't seem like he was faking it at all. Like, that's actually him, even though he's trying to bait him in and did the Max Holloway stuff. You can tell that that's like true to who he is inside, especially from this East Coast heritage, coming from Rhode Island at a pizza parlor. You know what I mean? So this is a fighter I'm definitely excited to see moving forward, and this is definitely a big win for him, beating Bam Bam's little brother, Kevin.
Yeah, he's a guy that, I think would be perfect for Contender Series. A lot of times,
man, you nailed that. Yeah.
Yeah, just like, if you look over their roster that they had last year, they did have a lot of these guys that were maybe green prospects, guys like Sean O'Malley, Kyler Phillips, Bevan Lewis. Those guys were, only had a handful of fights, and they were kind of, everybody at the gym was probably telling, you got to watch out for this guy's going to be the next big thing. But most of the guys that they had on that show were guys that were established on the regional scene, like Matt Bissett, who we talked about earlier. Like
who
Greg
lost
Rebello.
On Contender Series.
Right, he lost. Greg Rebello was on Contender Series. He
And
lost. So,
yeah.
So tough couple of fights for New England. But in terms of like established fighters, it seemed like that was a big demographic of who they brought onto that show, was guys that have been on the regional scene, but were they good enough to be in the big show? And I think Paiva is young enough where he doesn't have much downside for them to at least take a chance on him. Bring him on the show. I think he's perfect, absolutely perfect for that.
I do too. I 100% hands down agree with you there, Nolan. So you either you or me need to tweet that out, because I think that's a no-brainer. That really is a no-brainer. He has everything that people want to see, even though we're talking about the cocky style. You got to be careful. People freaking eat that up. So that's a good one. Moving forward to our main event, and then we're going to pick our fight of the night. I'm gonna let you take this one because I think that you're gonna be able to pronounce this last name. It took me a while to get it down, but I want to hear how you say it. Me and you were going back and forth with it, and I still think that I get it wrong, but I'm gonna give this one to you.
Okay, from my understanding, Travis View versus Greg Rebello, the main event, for CES 48, was again another quick finish. CES sticking with their go-to here. View we hadn't seen for a year. Rebello,
he fought in
like
the
I
UFC.
said, yeah, he fought way back in the day. In the UFC, and
Even in
he fought
Pride,
in Pride.
I think.
He fought in Pride. He fought in Bellator, I believe. He's fought everywhere. There's probably we could make a shorter list of places he hasn't fought. But yeah, man, that was a quick fight. He kind of went for maybe a sloppier takedown, just kind of rushed things. And Rebello had a good takedown stuff, and then finished it up with some ground and pound from the stuffed position, turned to the side, the back mount, the side mount on the back, finished him with some shots, and that's I believe 4 in a row for Rebello or 3 in a row. So maybe he's a guy that will still be on the Contender Series radar. They need heavyweights, they need him, and he's been so good for so long. He's had a couple screw ups, when it gets to the big show. So it was 4 out of 5, for Rebello. Maybe we'll see him back on this season. And if not, I'm sure he'll still be kicking ass on the regional scene here. Like he said after the fight, he wants to get back in here, as soon as possible.
Travis View, for so long, people butchered his name because it does not look like it should be View.
Oh, no,
and
not at all.
For everybody listening to the podcast, that you're like, how could you mix up the last name View? Like, if you think about it, it shouldn't be spelled Wiuff. But apparently that it is. I mean, it sounds like woof, like a dog's woof.
Yeah,
but...
I mean, I always thought it was that up until this fight, actually. I'm glad I had happened to watch, I think we talked about him earlier, James Lynch. Good dude, good friend of, I think you're friendly with him as well. He's just a great guy. He's always the one to get the first interviews out. So when I was going to speak with Rebello, I kind of was listening to his interview just to see if there's anything I was forgetting about or just kind of refresh myself. And good thing I listened because he called him Travis View, and I was like, who was that? That's not who he's fighting. And sure enough, that's the right pronunciation. So shout out to James for making me not look like an idiot. But it's honestly, you don't even really look like an idiot when you pronounce it that way, because or the wrong way, because that's totally how it looks like it's supposed to be said.
Well, now you got it down, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. But the challenge is, in MMA, you're going to come across so many different cultures and ways to pronounce names. You can even have names where there's 3 different ways to pronounce them, like Brazilian names and stuff, like Spanish names. So this was definitely a weird one, and Travis actually used to train with Pat Miletich back in the day, and Pat actually used to butch his name all the time, and Travis used to actually bust his balls on it. So, moving forward for Travis, man, I just feel bad because, losing that title fight, and, this was a big one for him, getting the main event, and, what are your thoughts for him moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because it seemed like, he was off for a year. I'm kind of curious maybe to hear as to why he was off for a year. But I know, like, in the interview beforehand, he kind of said, like, I've been through almost 100 fights. Like, if I lose this, it's not a big deal, stuff like that. So I don't know how – again, I don't want to read too much into things, but, I don't know if he's just kind of suffering some motivation issues or if he's just trying to get to that 100 mark or whatever. But, the guy's done everything. I'm not sure what else he really has left to prove other than if he wants to hit that 100 milestone, which would be pretty cool, I guess, to have 100 fights on your record. But is it worth the brain damage and the other injuries that come along? I guess we'll find out. Maybe they can give him a little bit of a step down from like a Greg Rebello. Still make it a respectable fight, but not somebody that is been on the cusp of getting signed by the UFC for like 5 years.
I mean, he has 25 wins by submission, and 24 wins by knockout. And it's tough when you're in that position, man, because if you do want to end your career, you don't want to end it on a loss. So if you keep pushing forward, you get the guys like, Big Daddy, who just couldn't get that last win. He tried to get knocked out. And ultimately now he's having seizures and stuff like that. And it's just sad, man. So hopefully he gets a grip on what the right thing to do is. And hopefully God will set him in the right direction here. But after a finish like that quick in 23 seconds, I mean, me and you were sitting there and we were like so pumped for this main event. and it seemed like things just got started, and it didn't even last as long as the Snapchat clip.
Yeah, man, it was over before it started. It seemed like kind of not the way I was expecting. I was sure we were going to see, if it was going to end that quickly, it would be a stand-up exchange. But I know
It was
View
weird.
does have the strong, does have some wrestling background there. So, I guess he thought he'd try something different, catch Rebello a little off guard, and it didn't really pay off as Rebello finished him. Just a handful of seconds into the bout.
So as we relook over this entire card, before we end today's show, me and Nolan are going to pick our personal favorite fight of the night. And, if you were Dana White and I was Sean Shelby or son, first off, instead of your favorite fight of the night, which one that's not your fight of the night really stood out? Like, what plays second on your list of fight of the night here? We'll start with that.
It's tough. For second, I did like the Guyton fight that we talked about earlier. I thought it was only like 30 seconds long, but they threw crazy amount of punches for that little short period of time, ended in a spectacular knockout.
The second fight of the night.
Yeah, that would probably be my pick. Some people don't like to throw that in their fight of the nights. The ones that are really quick. I get that completely. But I think that that's why it's not my number one. Was the quickness of the fight.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense, and that only adds to the hype of, if you see a fighter get a win in 13 seconds like the first fight, or you see a fighter get a win in 39 seconds like the second fight, you're only more compelled to wonder what is next for them. Like, you get a little more excited to see what they're going to be able to do next. So there's no issue with you picking that as your second fight of the night. My second fight of the night, I really give it to Sweetbread and Barberina because it did go to decision, and if it was my fight of the night, I wouldn't want it to go to decision. But at the same time, this is a fight where I'm excited to see what's next. Like, honestly, this is a huge win for Sweetbread. He had the old Italian thing, which connected with me. So I got to pick that as my runner-up. And it was perfect fitting for a co-main event, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. They couldn't ask for much more. You always want to have that, especially with heavyweights. You want to have that supporting fight that people feel like, oh, I got more than 30 seconds out of a big fight. So
you know what it is, Nolan? I feel like you can get a good story out of Sweetbread because, just this fight, you had him fighting a UFC little brother. Like I keep saying, the Italian thing, like there is a character there that you need to chisel out, and the UFC should see that right now. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Which is why he'd be perfect
and
on
like
Contenders.
you said, I think Axis did a wonderful job with that little piece. I'd like to.
Yeah.
I've noticed their last few events for LFA, they did stuff like that too with some of the, local, wherever they are in the location. They're in Texas, they'd go to, the guy from Texas that's fighting in the co-main event, they do something with him. So I like to see them do that more. That was, like you said, it adds a whole new element to things, to get to see these guys in their elements.
It creates the storyline, it creates interest, and you never know who it's going to connect with. I mean, all you really need is one person each show to have a personal connection with a fighter, and they'll love them forever. You know what I mean? Like you'll have a new fan for life. So that's definitely the runner-up for my fight of the night. So that gets us into, what was your fight of the night, Nolan?
Yeah, I'd go with my fight of the night. I thought the atmosphere, the storyline, the just overall excitement of the fight, the diversity of the fight. I'm going to have to go with Brian Marino and Jerome Mikkel. I thought those two guys laid it all on the line. They weren't necessarily the top tier of CES. They were very solid competitors on CES, but their heart showed through. They both took a number of shots. Mikkel didn't seem to get flustered by the huge Marino crowd that was there. That was one of the bigger, more enthusiastic crowds I've seen at CES. A huge fan base. Obviously, there's good reason why. So that's my pick. I thought that was a fun fight, and it was a really good value fight on the card. It wasn't the main event, it wasn't the co-main event, but it was a fun fight that when you think back and remember, this card had more than two fights that were worth talking about.
You know what? I am hands down 100% agreeing with you here. I think that had the biggest standout. Not just the message that I got from the post-fight speech, not just the interest that was created from, this guy hasn't been fighting in 7 years. He fought for our country, but he went in there and he put on some exciting GSP Superman punches. There was perfectly timed takedowns, and he even ate a lot of shots that didn't faze him. And these two were just going at it and really put on a great performance on both ends. Win or lose, I think both these guys deserve a little extra in their paycheck. So a big shout out to Brian BJ Marino and Jerome Mickle. Mickle unfortunately moves to 3-4, but Brian BJ Marino moves to 6-1 with 3 knockouts, 2 submissions. And even though this fight ended in a unanimous decision, I don't like picking fights as fight of the night to end in decision, this is just what is going to stick with me for the rest of the time when I think back to CES 48. Not just the Taco Bell and the KFC and sitting next to Nolan, but that fight. And if there was one takeaway from a scarring image, it's definitely that brutal knockout where, oh man, was it Lockard that was out for?
Woods.
Woods was out for like 3 minutes. That was definitely the most scarring fight. Nolan, final thoughts on CES 48. What was your rating out of 10 stars? What's your rating? Go.
I'd give it a 7.5. I think if we can do 0.5s, I thought that was very good. I know that it seemed like to me this was a little bit put together maybe at the last second. It just seemed like, they had the main event fallout and then they were trying to play around with some other things. So I know what they're capable of. They always put on good shows. Their fights are always fun. So I thought this was a solid 7.5, maybe even creeping up into the 8 category. But good stuff on them. I'd like to see their I think I said this to you, since they've signed the Access TV deal and now they're on a regular basis, they've been killing it. Their entertainment value's way up. They've been producing UFC stars, and I have nothing but good things to say. All the fighters really enjoy fighting for them, and great show, and I'll definitely be looking forward to their next one whenever that may be.
CES 48 in the books. I'm gonna give it. I mean, here's the thing. There was a lot of really nice finishes on this card that happened instantly, and that's a huge boost. You're definitely winning brownie points in my book if you're getting knockouts that quick. There was a lot of excitement for pro debuts and just a lot of interest created of what is next for this guy. It's falling into 7 for me. It could be an 8, like you said, but if there was a couple more like third round brutal back and forth finishes, I mean,
those are the best, aren't they?
Yeah. And you know what? For the most part, I'll give him this. Another thing that's not giving him an 8, and it's totally understandable, is because a lot of these guys are growing. We're not that familiar. We know some of the guys that, might be jobbers that we've seen in the UFC or Bellator and stuff like that. But this definitely sticks at a 7 just because the potential of stars that are growing. Last thing before we go, out of this list, who do you think is going to wind up on the UFC?
Oh, I think there were a couple people that I was interested in seeing, how they did in these fights, and like I said, Tim Karen was one of them. His fight kind of ended oddly, so I didn't really get a good gauge. Rico DeSciulio is another guy that I thought was kind of, his fight ended kind of bizarrely. So, I mean, for me, the one that sticks out the most, I think, is Dennis Paiva. He's got to go with him again. I think he's the leader of the pack right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interest for me on that one, but I still think it's a little young for him, but he's growing, man. And if he can get a couple more wins, get that momentum building, and I would love to see him on the Contender Series. Like I said, I'm going to go tweet that right now. Hopefully get him on Pure Evil MMA for you guys, because it's definitely somebody that I want you guys to, I want to introduce to you guys that don't know him. So I'm going to agree with you again, Nolan. I'm going to agree with you again.
On the same page.
We're both on the same page. And if you guys didn't catch it, I don't know if Access TV is going to replay it, but like Nolan said, this is a huge that they picked up this Access TV deal on the end of them cutting a deal with Lion Fight, which is a huge loss for Lion Fight. So big pickup for CES 48. It's in the books. I'm giving it a 7. Nolan gives it a 7.5. You guys heard it here. I'm Evil Eddie from Pure Evil MMA. That's Nolan King. Nolan, last note, where can everybody find you on Instagram, Twitter, and all that?
Yeah, so, Instagram at nking029, Twitter at MMA_Kings, and then you can see my work both on MMA-today.com and flowcombat.com. But anybody that, if you're ever wondering anything or whatever, feel free. My inbox is open on DMs, and shoot me a message. I love talking fights, and anybody that needs to know anything else, just feel free to shoot me a message.
And guys, it's not just local fights that Nolan's covering. Nolan is talking with some of the UFC guys like we do here, some of the Bellator guys like we do. So it's not just the local guys. I know there's a smaller interest there. Nolan actually breaks a lot of news and has been doing a great job this year on Twitter. So please go check him out, because you will not, like Nolan, you every time you tweet, it's on my notification thing. Like I have you on my alert, because there's a handful of media guys out there that break news firsthand, and you don't hear it on ESPN, you don't hear it on FS1. In MMA, it's the underground that really runs our sport, and you're doing a great job, man. I'm looking forward to what happens with you in the rest of 2018. So thank you so much for coming on Pure Evil.
Thanks so much for having me, man. I appreciate it. We'll have to do it again for sure, and hopefully I start running into you at more events in the greater New England, New York area. So I'm sure I'll run into you, buddy.
Last note, Nolan. I don't know if you're going to be at Bellator, but they just sent credentials out like 2 hours ago.
I got my confirmation, man. So will I be seeing you there?
So then I'll see you there. How about that?
Awesome.
So guys, you can expect a recap from me and Nolan, most likely there at the casino, if not afterwards. Nolan, thank you so much.
Hey, anytime, man. You just say the word, and I'm happy to come talk. I love doing this.
Appreciate it, and most of all, behave yourself.
Yeah, you too, man.